Yeah, it is indeed a pleasure for me to be here today. And you notice that Nina was mentioning the word farm several times, right? Because I wanted to make sure that my credentials were in order here today. I want to thank Nina and Kenny for creating Bioneers and what has developed into one of the most important series of conversations about the future of our country and our planet. And hello to all of the beamers out there too, as well as this wonderful substantial audience here in the auditorium. I did indeed spend the first few years of my life on a farm. It may not be what you have in mind, though. This was Lowndes County, Alabama, 1944. We were surrounded by the KKK. Fortunately for us, our family was immediate descendants of slaves and Confederate soldiers. You get that combination, right? So that often people couldn't tell whether my uncles or aunts were actually one of them or us, So we were protected a bit by that in Lowndes County, Alabama. It was actually that farm, too, that in March of 1965, that the civil rights marchers from Selma to Alabama spent the night on our farm. And we have a great plaque up there. So when the family gets into the big argument about whether we sell it or keep it, those family arguments, we always point to the plaque and say, how could you possibly give that up, And then they say, well, maybe we could just keep that one spot, where the... and sell the rest, Everybody's going to college, we need the money. So for now, the ones who want to hang on to the history are winning, and the ones who want to stay with the land are winning. So that my mother the way they did farms then was that my mother was one of 15 children. That's the way they did it. 9 girls, 6 boys, and everybody worked the farm. But at a certain point, because of one of the older sisters, all 9 girls, if you could imagine this, people wonder where my feminist roots stem from. And they stem from Lowndes County, Alabama, because all 9 girls went to college, all 6 boys stayed at home and worked the farm, and then after that went off to the factory. So there was some bitterness, there was a divide right there. But the girls were the ones who got to go to college, and they all graduated and got their degrees. So we're shaped. There were 15 in that generation. I have 45 first cousins, and we're all shaped by the farming experience. My cousins and I talk about the days. We have different recollections, though, because there are 45 of us, as they were rolling in. Some of the younger ones don't remember, the lack of running water and the growing of cotton, which we had to pick. My younger cousins say, you're crazy, you're out of mind. You're out of mind, that wasn't us. But that was Lowndes County, Alabama. That was Alabama. That was the KKK. That was a family growing from farming roots, and I want just to give you the post note on that is that of the 45 and even of the next generation, every single person got to go to college. Absolutely no one ever went to jail. So if you're looking at what is possible in America, and we're talking about stories, and I, of course, I'm very hard on the media because I was once inside, so I know that the train of thought is that there's always jail, there's always lack of education, there's always, but it's not, especially if it's, the farm. Now, after I retired from the news, I got to work on another farm. I don't know whether you know Sandy Lerner and Ayrshire Farm in Upperville, Virginia. She's a friend of mine. We met, I could say I went to Oxford for exactly 1 week, but in that 1 week, Sandy Lerner was also there. We met and we became friends, and when I was retired from the news and was working on my first book with my daughter, she said, come down, you can work the farm, you can, we have a restaurant, you can do all of that, and then you can, also write your book, which turned out to be not quite true if you know how hard farming is. But nevertheless, she has a 3,000 acre organic, humane farm. She's preserving rare breeds, endangered heritage, And all of that work is going on. There's a restaurant, there's a shop, and there's a nonprofit trying to help other farmers convert in the way that she's done, because it's really not so easy. And so I was participating in all of that. And I, like to think that I had the communications portfolio, since I had been a former reporter. But in fact, one day, my friends in New York found out exactly what a communications portfolio meant, because our work was so distinguished. Reporters from around the world would come, especially around Thanksgiving. They wanted to see our big, fat, organic turkeys. And so my job with the communications portfolio was to make sure that the reporters were taken care of. Now, this was definitely revenge, karma coming back, to bite me, because, one day my phone rang and my New York friend said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, right now I'm a little busy." She says, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm actually trying to herd a bunch of turkeys behind a reporter, a German. Can I call you back?" And I said, "They're very uncooperative, if anybody knows turkeys, They had no interest in following my suggestion or orders to stand behind, to gather behind this German reporter. It was at that point where she said, "Carol, please come home." And I did a little bit after that. The one thing I did want to know, because if we're talking about women, that if you know Sandy Lerner, she also had a previous life, many lives, but she was actually one of the co-founders of Cisco Systems, and she was actually one of the creators of the commercial router that makes our access to the internet possible. So that I just want to say, yes, there was a woman at the very beginning of all of this. So. We had running water, as you might imagine, at Ayrshire Farm in Upperville, unlike Lowndes County. I do, and also Nina mentioned certified humane. She was talking about humane farm animal care, which you should know about. We certify, it's a national certification organization across the country of farms, producers, restaurants, shops, stores, some even in New York City that have actually gotten certified humane. But as we say, look for the humane label before you purchase. We want to make sure that farm animals are taken care of in a respectful way. And you can go to certifiedhumane.org if you want to know about that process, becoming a part of it, and making sure that that's the way you proceed. So that's my farm girl story. That's all there is to that. We still have the farm. We're still in Alabama. I went on to move to New York, and then I spent 30 years as a working journalist in New York City. And then after that, helped Gloria Steinem, Jane Fonda, and Robin Morgan set up the Women's Media Center. And as you may know, Jody Evans, who is here today, is the chair of our board. Yay, Jody, who does the Women's Media Center and a few other things like Code Pink and Bioneers and those kinds of things. I said I have it on my bucket list to one day get arrested with Jody, but I'm always telling her, not today, maybe tomorrow, Jody, but it is on my list. I want to talk a little bit now about the media and what I see, and I titled this talk, "The Public Square is Empty," aside from the occasional hanging. Which really always gets us. We have a few more little juices left. That if somebody's being, destroyed, we can turn our attention to the public square. But for the most part, Americans are at war. They're at war with one another. We're divided by race, by class, by gender, by faith, and by rigid politics. Now, you can't have a functioning democracy if your media is broken, and I think it's broken. The public sphere, that piece of democracy that I see as the old-fashioned town square, where people gathered to hear what was important in their lives in order to make decisions. Remember that the revolution of participatory democracy meant that ordinary citizens could, in fact, vote. Of course, in the earliest days, ordinary meant land-holding white men, but we've made some progress in the days since then, mostly. We have evolved, but the news piece was always meant to deliver enough objective information. Remember that word when it was used in conjunction, with the media, objective reporting, to deliver enough objective information for citizens to make sound decisions. This is, you know, the foundation of what we are as Americans and where we are and what we're about. How do we make choices about who to vote for? Only what I see now is not the eager focus on the deliverer of the news, the truth of the matter. There's another word we don't hear so often anymore, truth. One would hope that all eyes would be forward, but instead I think what we have now is that our backs are turned to this public square. I envision, you know, everybody standing around that version of being hooked up to our own earphones, listening to our own music, and in this case, you know, our personalized hit lists of opinions and sometimes even diatribes. Reading our siloed websites, watching our ideologically pleasing cable networks, returning to our own kind in every single way. Now remember, we went through a time in our country when we were completely divided and separated and siloed, and now what seems to be happening as a reaction to the status that we're in is that people are turning away. They really can't face the public square. It's too loud, it's too noisy, it's too disturbing. And so we have moved into our own spaces. Now, the problem with this, as we are now moving into the essence of our own identities as opposed to our national identity, is that we are in a logjam in our country. We cannot move ahead. You know, and the media is at fault here for not providing enough information, enough objectivity, enough truth for us to want to listen. Now, it happens sometimes that we do attend, and I want to remind you that at a certain point in our history, that public square, another form of that, was public lynchings. You know, mostly black, but also white people, men, women, and children who were strung up in a tree. And as you'll remember, this was picnic time. People would bring their picnic baskets, and they would take photographs, and they would cheer, and we still do that, you know, when somebody is getting destroyed in the media. You know, we can gin ourselves up to participate in that way, but not in a reasonable, productive way. Mainstream media, after all of these years of working at inclusion, has failed. And if in this election cycle, a presidential commission cannot or does not select a person of color from our television networks to moderate a debate, then television networks have not done their job. If in 2012, selecting a woman moderator, the first in 20 years now, to pose a question to a presidential candidate, if that's still a big deal, we've got a problem. And if in a male-moderated debate with two male presidential candidates, the word woman or poor or hungry children or disabled does not come up, we've got a massive, massive problem. And that problem is the persistent, intractable resistance in the media to productive, full inclusion of women and people of color, and immigrants, and people of varying gender identifications, the disabled, and increasingly, and I'm very sensitive to this issue, the elderly. You know? The result is that we are a nation of outsiders. We're a nation of outsiders who see little reflection of our existence or contributions to our own society. My point of perspective, I describe media as my family business. Both of my fathers, yeah, we had that kind of family. Both of my fathers, my biological father was a reporter. He worked in the White House, but he worked for the black press. He didn't have the option at that point of working for the New York Times. He worked for the Pittsburgh Courier. My stepfather, a printer, you know, who for 35 years stood in a window in Birmingham, Alabama, looking out of his print shop, and finally published a magazine for black soldiers during World War II, transforming, as so many others in our history have done, a printing press into a social movement, you know, into something that would actually grab people, inform them, and give them a proper reflection of their contribution in the world. So they did that. I came into television as a reporter, and I came in because outside forces demanded, that blacks and women be included. It wasn't that it was some great news director or general manager's idea, gee, you know what, we're missing a few people here. Let's hire a few women. Let's hire a few blacks. I came in, and when the commissions were then saying that both women and people of color, they called us dressing on the set, which meant that we had no pure function, in the line, you're in the business world, what do you do? So that was our role, of window dressing on the set. My daughter now works on the internet, she edits and writes, and this was supposed to be the next generation of where everything would equal out, right? And so far, at least from my daughter's pocketbook and her paycheck, she says, it hasn't equaled out, but she loves the work. So we have all of those generations, and that's why the media is my family business, and that is why I am so concerned about it. In 1827, the very first black newspaper was published. The publishers said then, it was called Freedom's Journal, and what the publishers said was, we're not being included in an effective way. We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. And so since 1827, there have been black newspapers, black publications, in a side-by-side parallel universe telling the story of African Americans, as they have for Latinos, as they have for every other group, every other population in this country who have not been covered, have not been included in the mainstream media. I was hired, and I will tell this story because Nina was talking about the women issue. So I get hired, which was a fantastic, wonderful thing, and I get in a newsroom, and I see that there are a few women, as we're going through. And one day, a news director called me aside, and he said, Carol, and I actually have a letter which goes into my papers. Carol, it's come to our attention that you're attempting to organize the women in the newsroom. Please feel free to leave at any time. And so that was the way we were treated then. There was no such thing as, being, having the gumption enough to try to organize the women in the newsroom. I hung in there for another 30 years. And then when I went to the Women's Media Center, I said, isn't that fabulous? It's this is my reward. It's my job to organize the women. So it took 30 years, but it came along. So in 2005, when we said that we were going to start the Women's Media Center, we were called to Gloria Steinem's living room, and I always say, if you get a call to go to Gloria Steinem's living room, you're in trouble. That means there's a lot of work for you. But some of the leading women in New York City were there, and the complaint was universal of the women gathered there. Women are not represented fairly in the media, and we don't participate at the level that we should. This is in 2005, after all of this time of trying to get networks, newspapers, et cetera, to be inclusive, and it hadn't happened. So I just have this figure that we worked with in 2005, and it hasn't changed at all. So you see women on television all the time. So you can't say that there hasn't been progress. You see people of color too, to a lesser degree, but you see there has been progress. But if you want to know the position of the percentage of clout positions that women hold in the media, someone just came to me the other day and they said, oh yeah, it's such and such a network, there's plenty of women's leadership there. The managing editor is a woman. Yeah. And I said, and can you tell me how many layers of management are above her? Would it be 10? Would it be 20 by the time you got, to the top of that media outlet? So women hold exactly 3% of the clout positions in media. So what you have to understand when you see all of these figures, you see all of these women, all of the people graduating from journalism school, they're all women, they're all going into the field, and yet it is still the men who occupy the corner offices. This is the pipeline. Once someone said, oh, Carol, relax, there are women in the pipeline, they'll eventually get there. And I said, but I'd like to see it, you know? It won't happen in my lifetime. The pipeline was moving so slowly in every single way that without outside agitation, without everybody noticing, and without everybody saying, this has to stop, we have to change because it is not fair. We don't live in a just society. The Women's Media Center report, the status of women in U.S. media in 2012, just 21%, or a fifth, of women are sitting in those chairs on Sunday morning, and you have the impression that it's more than that, but it's just 21% who occupy, you know, the high positions and therefore can be brought legitimately to sit in a chair and answer questions about the future of the United States. 21%. The National Association of Black Journalists released its 2012 Census of Diversity in Broadcast Newsrooms. It concludes that although people of color now represent 35% of the population in our country, they represent only 12% of management in newsrooms. So there's a huge gap. Some 42% of print newsrooms across the country employ no blacks, no Asian Americans, no Latinos, or American Indian journalists at all, 42% of the newsrooms across the country. And yet we have the rise now of successful black websites like The Griot, The Root, Black Voices. We have many women's websites, Women's E-News, Women's Media Center. You know, we have all of this in what is essentially segregated media once again. The importance of ethnic media, I want to make sure, though, cannot be overemphasized. If you know New American Media, if you don't know them, you should. What they've done is coordinated the coverage of some 2,000 ethnic news organizations across the country, 2,000, with 57 million consumers. Now, you would think that the ever-hungry, money-hungry networks, news people would, if you hear that, 57 million people that we don't have under our thumbs yet, you know, but they have not moved yet to be inclusive. That's what is to gain, should they move in that direction, should we help them to move in that direction. At the Women's Media Center, I think we have a pretty good model of how to approach this in every sphere. And no matter what you do in this auditorium, the essential link to all of us is the media. It's the fundamental base. It's the thread that connects us all. You know, it's the one that will shape our lives. It's the one that will let people know about the work that we do. It will bring us support that we need. It will change the world by being inclusive if we make them do it. So that's the thread that unites us all in this room. What the Women's Media Center did was in the 2008 election, if you all remember that, where, you know, I always said, for goodness sake, if you can find a black man and a woman to run for president of the United States, surely you can find somebody to ask them questions. Surely you could find somebody to run a newsroom. Surely, you know, and yet the answer was absolutely not. What we did was a tape of, because they kept saying to us, you know, oh, you women, you girls, go away. There is no sexism in media. And so with Media Matters, we recorded all of these egregious comments, and then afterwards we took them to each network, and we showed the bosses what they let their on-air talent get away with, mostly insulting Hillary Clinton, you know, some of it Sarah Palin. And you could see them sliding down in their chairs because it wasn't 2 minutes, it wasn't 5 minutes, we had a half an hour, you know, of outrageous sexism, you know, being leveled at women candidates and being therefore leveled at all women. They made a special point of while they were insulting Hillary, trying to insult everybody else. It was a very, very nice trick. So one of the things that we saw after that was that, and MSNBC had been one of our targets, and we showed them their tape. I have to say now that they've made some changes. I like, if you watch what they have, they even have young people, you know, on their shows. They've got diversity. They've got men, women. You know, they have made a change. We went to CNN. We showed them, you know, their tape. Yeah, and we told them, oh, and by the way, Candy Crowley is a superstar. You should give her a show. And they did. So, you know, when we started this, people, you know, would say, you can't make a change. You can't do anything. But my friends, we can. So that I am urging you here to make this link, you know, to join us at the womensmediacenter.com. And not to think that because it says Women's Media Center that it doesn't affect you. It does. It affects you, your children, your grandchildren. It affects the lives that you will all have. If we can't make this media be responsive to the outsiders, because that's what we really all are, if we're not a white male of a certain background, we're all outsiders. So we can do this, and I urge you to please join up with us. Take it seriously. In the old days, we used to say, write a letter. Now we say, start a campaign. You can get 40,000 people to sign a petition. The technology is with us. This is now the time to create a media that reflects our society. We can't continue to turn our backs on the public square, because it will lead us to destruction. Thank you all so much.